Welcome back to the All About Everest podcast. I'm your host, Pauline Reynolds Nuttall. Today, we're diving into one of the greatest mysteries in climbing history, the story of George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine. These two British climbers vanished high on Mount Everest in 1924, leaving behind one of the most enduring questions in mountaineering. Did they make it to the summit nearly 3 decades before Hillary and Norgay? I've covered them before, but this episode's going to be a little bit more detailed. And also, there are some updates since the last time I talked about George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine. And plus, last year, which was 2024, and I'd had this recorded most of it at the time, it was 100 years since their expedition in 1924 and their deaths. We'll explore their lives, their final expedition, and the ongoing intrigue surrounding their disappearance. But before we get there, I have a quick update about this year's fall climbing season, some important news from Nepal itself, a new book you'll want to add to your reading list, and a couple of outdoor gear recommendations that I've been loving lately. One of the things that I wanted to share with you is last week I talked about how I'd gotten so many emails and messages and things like that. And I got this email the day after last week's episode. And I did get permission from Shelly to share this with you guys. And I thought it was really sweet and it made my day. Hi, Pauline. I just wanted to reach out as a new listener and say how much I've been enjoying your podcast. After the death of Juliana Marins in June this year, I ended up down a rabbit hole that ignited my interest in all things Everest. And this is how I discovered your podcast. I ended up binge listening all 3 seasons in just a couple of weeks. I was so disappointed when I realized the episodes ended abruptly last year. On a fluke, I checked back last week and saw 2 new episodes, and it made my day. Your content is thoughtful, engaging, and exactly the kind of podcast I need to cleanse my palate of the crazy news cycle and the worst timeline ever. I just wanted you to know that you've gained a new, very enthusiastic subscriber who's looking forward to more All About Everest podcast episodes. Thank you for putting your voice and work out into the world. I know it takes a lot. Just know that you have more fans than detractors. All the best to you and your family, and wishing continued success to your podcast. Warmly, Shelly from Barbados. P.S. My favorite interview of yours was the one with Adrian Bollinger, and please consider adding Ryan Mitchell to your list of possible interviewees. I have reached out to Ryan, and Adrian was a top interview for a lot of people. It's in our top 10 episodes. So thank you so much, Shelly. I appreciate you. All right, let's start with Everest today. This fall season on the Nepal side of the mountain is, well, unusually quiet. In fact, Nepal issued just one climbing permit, and it went to Polish ski mountaineer Andrzej Bargiel. We talked about this last week as well. That makes him the only climber attempting Everest from the Nepal side this fall. And as far as I know, there is no one who is trying from the Tibetan side. And the fall, there's really not a lot of activity on Mount Everest anyway. It is more challenging and it's usually devoted to very special projects. Right now, Bargiel is working on his acclimatization routine, preparing for a possible summit attempt. And it's worth remembering in autumn, there are no icefall doctors. These are the Sherpa specialists who normally fix ropes and ladders through the Khumbu icefall in spring. Without them, the climbers either have to set their own route or climb without that infrastructure. It makes the fall season far more dangerous and far less popular than spring. Still, Bargiel is an experienced and ambitious mountaineer, and a lot of people are watching to see what he can accomplish this season. Meanwhile, down in Kathmandu, Nepal itself is facing a very different kind of challenge. The country has been gripped by youth-led protests after the government tried to ban social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube. What started as online frustration quickly turned into massive demonstrations, and unfortunately, the response from security forces turned violent. I believe the death toll was over 20, and it's young people from ages 14 to 27, 28 that are out there protesting. Over 100 people have been injured, and protesters even set fire to parts of parliament and government offices. The prime minister has since resigned. There's been a curfew, even a partial shutdown of the airport, and the army has been deployed. The government has lifted the social media ban, but the unrest really shows the deep frustration among Nepal's younger generation. Corruption, limited job opportunities, and political instability are fueling the anger. And while Everest often feels like it's its own world, it's important to remember that the lives of the people who live in Nepal, including the Sherpas who guide climbers, are deeply affected by these national struggles. It's been a common thread over the last couple of years of how the government is so flippy floppy and even corrupt. And we do know that Nepal is one of the poorest countries in the world, and it's not necessarily the most stable one. I don't know if this will have a long term effect on climbing on Mount Everest in the springtime, but you never know because, and I know this very well, things can change in seconds, creating so much chaos in one country. On a lighter note, I want to share a book recommendation. I totally forgot about this one last episode, and I felt so bad. It's called Beyond Everest, One Sherpa Summit and Hope for Nepal by Corinne Richardson with Pen Dorji Sherpa. And this actually was released last year in 2024. You may know Pem Dorji's name. In 2005, he and his wife, Moni Mulapati, made history by becoming the first couple to marry on the summit of Everest. But his story doesn't stop there. The book takes us from his childhood in Nepal to his climbing career and then into his work to bring education and opportunity to his community. What I love about this book is that it gives Everest from a Sherpa's perspective. It's not just about the climb, it's about resilience, family, and what the mountain means to the people who live in its shadow. Another thing that I wanted to add every single episode, and I've kind of done it before, but now I really want to do it, is I want to give you guys gear recommendations. I know that not everyone is outdoorsy, so I'm trying to bring to you gear ideas and recommendations of stuff that are good, like in case of emergencies or just in general. And these are not affiliate links in any way. They're just products that are sent to me for my blog, and I've tried them. And I don't recommend everything, but these two things I think were super awesome, so I wanted to share them with you. The first is Sawyer Bug Repellent. Sawyer is known for their water filters, but apparently they make bug repellent too. And if you spend any time outdoors, camping, hiking, or even just sitting on your porch in summer, you know how relentless mosquitoes and ticks can be. I live in the woods. I know. And we also spend over 40 nights a year camping. And this year, I think we hit 45. Sawyer makes repellents that actually last. They also make a permethrin spray you can apply to your clothing and gear, which I love because it adds another layer of protection without the sticky feeling of traditional sprays. I used my Sawyer bug repellent out at the family ranch, and last year was horrible because there was these little gray flies. Well, this bug repellent absolutely worked amazing. And then we tried a new lake this year. And again, I took the bug repellent. It lasted all day. And there was these horrible mosquitoes. No one else used the bug repellent except me. They used, that stuff that has D in it. And I just used the spray from Sawyer. Oh my gosh, not a single mosquito bite. It was amazing. The second product that I wanted to recommend is the Duracell 3000L Tri-Power Rechargeable Lantern. I have 6 of the 2000 ones, and I love them, absolutely love them. But the 3000 lumen one, oh my gosh, even better. And I quickly went out and bought 5 more. So now I have 6, and my old ones I donated. So why do I have so many? I have 2 for my house, 1 for upstairs, 1 for downstairs. I have 2 for my barn, which is an Airbnb. And so there's 1 upstairs and 1 downstairs. And then I have 1 in my camper for when we go camping. And then another one in my car, which can be taken out if we need it for backpacking or hiking or any of those things. What I like about this is there's 3 ways to charge it. You can charge it via solar, battery, or USB. And it's a lantern and a charger. And not even that. The coolest part of it is the solar panel on top that charges it, you can actually move it. And That is my favorite feature because when we went camping with our older ones, you had to keep moving the lantern to follow the sun. And with this, you just have to adjust the panel. Absolutely amazing. And I hope you guys look up both of these products because they're super cool and practical. You never know when you're going to need an emergency lantern in case of a natural disaster or when the electricity goes out. And at my house, it goes out at least 4 to 5 times a year because I live in the woods and the trees usually fall on the power pole. I think last winter we had the power go out 7 times in 3 months. So, but I think they fixed a lot of that and they cut down a lot of trees this year and trimmed them. So that would be great. All right. And now on to the rest of the show. So let's go back in time 1924, when two climbers, George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine, set off for the summit of Everest and never returned. George Herbert Lee Mallory was born in 1886 in Cheshire, England, the son of a clergyman. He was raised in a comfortable but disciplined home where he developed a love for both the outdoors and the arts. At Cambridge University, he studied history and moved in intellectual circles of writers and artists. Friends described him as charming, witty, and strikingly handsome, almost like a Greek statue come to life. He married Ruth Turner in 1914 and they had 3 children together, but his passion for climbing often pulled him away from home. He started climbing as a little kid. He would climb to the roof of their house, and if I remember correctly, he climbed to the very top of the church. One of the most amazing things about him is it didn't matter where he was in the world, he wrote his wife. And there are so many letters that he wrote. Some of them have been shared with the public, not all of them, but he wrote and he wrote and he wrote. His letters to Ruth are heartbreaking at times, torn between his devotion to his family and his obsession with his passion for mountaineering and his obsession with Everest. Mallory also fought in World War I. Like many of his generation, the trauma of war shaped him deeply. For Mallory, Everest became more than just a mountain. It was about beauty, about testing limits, and maybe even finding meaning in a world broken by conflict. I almost wonder if he had suffered PTSD from World War I and if climbing gave him relief from that. By 1924, Mallory was already a veteran of Everest, having joined expeditions 1921 and 1922, and we know that neither of those expeditions were successful. On the latter, he and his team set a new altitude record, though the trip was scarred by tragedy when an avalanche killed 7 Sherpas. So, the mass casualty event in 1922 was the deadliest year for the longest time because of the 7 Sherpas that got killed by the avalanche. And since then, uh, the there have been multiple years where the death toll has been over 7. Andrew Sandy Irvine. Andrew Irvine, known to his friends as Sandy, and I'll refer to him as Sandy for the majority of the episode, was the opposite in many ways of George Mallory. Born in 1902, he was just 22 years old in 1924. He studied engineering at Oxford University, where he was known as much for his cheerful personality and reddish blonde hair as for his athletic achievements. He rode, cycled, and climbed, but more importantly, he had a brilliant mechanical mind. Irvine could fix just about anything. On a 1923 Arctic expedition, he impressed his teammates by keeping equipment running in brutal conditions. For Everest, his skill was invaluable. The oxygen equipment of the time was clunky and unreliable, and Irvine had a knack for improving it. And that's really what it came down to was this oxygen system. Because up until 1924, they hadn't used oxygen. And then George Mallory was like, the only way that we are going to reach the summit is with oxygen. I cannot see any other way of us doing it. And there were 3 groups with him, and the 2 other groups were pretty adamant not to use oxygen. But George Mallory was insistent, and that's why he brought Sandy along with him, because Sandy could make it work better and he could get the whole oxygen apparatus from breaking down, and it was more reliable after he tinkered with it. Mallory and Irvine met on the 1924 British expedition. Mallory was in his late 30s at the time and felt this would be his last chance at Everest. He chose Irvine as his summit partner, not because of experience. Irvine was far less seasoned than some others. He had very little mountaineering experience because of his strength, his reliability, and above all, his mastery of the oxygen systems. It was a gamble, a veteran dreamer paired with a youthful engineer. But together, they represented Britain's hope of finally conquering the world's highest mountain. The final ascent. On June 8th, 1924, Mallory and Irvine set off from their hike camp on the northeast ridge. Fellow climber Noel Odell watched from below. Around 12:50 p.m., he saw two figures moving strongly towards the summit before they vanished into the clouds. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. They never returned to camp. Did they reach the top before they perished, or did they fall short? That question has haunted mountaineering ever since. In 1999, an expedition led by Conrad Anker discovered Mallory's body at about 8,155 meters. His remains were remarkably well preserved, but there was no sign of the small Kodak camera he and Irvine were said to be carrying, a camera that might have held the proof of whether they summited. In 2024, filmmaker and climber Jimmy Chin made headlines when his team found what appeared to be part of a human foot preserved near the northeast ridge. In 2024, Jimmy Chin and Conrad Anker, they had a project for skiing that changed because of permits and some other things. But Jimmy was still able to go to Mount Everest and he found Irvine's body. They had tried to fight it before. And that's when they found George Mallory. Because initially, when they found Mallory in 1999, they thought that it was Sandy. And it turned out to be Mallory instead. Many believe that the foot that he found in 2024 may belong to Irvine. And the reason being is on the sock, it had his name on it. If his body is ever fully recovered, there's a chance the missing camera could still be with him. And they did send the part out for DNA testing, and I didn't see anywhere if that testing had been returned, but they were almost 100% sure that the foot belonged to Sandy just because of the sock, because of the type of the sock and because his name was in it. There's the conspiracy theory, and I think we've talked about it multiple times before. Some climbers believe that the Chinese expeditions in the 60s may have already found Irvine's body and possibly the camera, but kept it secret to preserve their claim of the first summit from the north side in 1960. There's no proof, but the whispers persist. And so the mystery endures. Two men lost to history. Did they stand on the summit nearly 30 years before Hillary and Norgay? The mountain still isn't saying. And the belief is they probably didn't reach the summit because I always get the names of like the areas mixed up. But remember, they claimed from the Tibetan side. And is it called the Hillary Step or is that on the Nepali side? I'll have to double check. But there's a portion where it's a it's a sheer cliff face. And now they navigate it with ladders. But back then, with the type of equipment that they had and the hobnail boots, they really don't think that they reached the top. And I know that I believe it was Conrad Anker and one other person. I'll have to double make sure. But they actually wore the period type clothing and the hobnail boots, and they tried to reach the summit of Everest wearing pretty much the same things that Mallory and Irvine were wearing and the same exact equipment, and they were not successful. So they determined it really was probably unlikely. 10 facts about George Mallory. Born in 1886 in Cheshire, England, studied history at Cambridge, married Ruth Turner and had 3 children, served in World War I, famous for saying, "Because it's there." I know you've seen it on t-shirts and magnets and bumper stickers. The story goes that a newspaper man came up to him and asked him, why Everest? Of all the mountains in the world, why Everest? And his reply was, "Because it's there." He climbed in the Alps before Everest. He joined the 1921 and 1922 Everest expeditions, chose Irvine as his summit partner in 1924, known for his striking good looks, and charisma. He was also known for his writing as well. His body was found in 1999, but the summit mystery remains unsolved. 10 facts about Andrew Sandy Irvine. Born in 1902 in Birkenhead, England, studied engineering at Oxford, nicknamed Sandy for his reddish blonde hair, excelled in rowing, cycling, and climbing, known for his cheerful personality, mechanical genius who refined the oxygen sets, youngest member of the 1924 expedition, chosen by Mallory for his technical skills and endurance, last seen on June 8th, 1924. His body has never been found, but they do believe that they found his foot. If you'd like to go deeper into their story, here are some books and films that I recommend. Books: The Lost Explorer by Conrad Anker and David Roberts, The Wildest Dream, Conquest of Everest by Peter Gilman and Lenny Gilman, Into the Silence by Wade Davis, Last Climb by David Brashears, Fallen Giants by Maurice Eiserman and Stuart Weaver. Films and documentaries that you may want to watch: The Epic of Everest, the original 1924 silent film, The Wildest Dream in 2010, Lost on Everest 2020 by National Geographic, and Lost on Everest, The Search for Mallory and Irvine from PBS Nova. The story of Mallory and Irvine is more than just a mountaineering tale. It's about ambition, sacrifice, youth obsession, and mystery. And it continues to inspire today as modern climbers like Andre Bargiel test themselves on the mountains, and as Sherpa voices like Pem Dorjes remind us of Everest's deeper meaning. The mountain is still shaping stories, just as it did a century ago. Next week's episode, I was flip-flopping a little bit, but one of the things that I haven't really talked about is the webcams and live feeds of Mount Everest. I don't know if everyone's aware of them. So next week, I'm going to talk about the world's highest webcams and Everest live feeds and some of the technology that has changed Everest over the last 50 years. Thanks for joining me for this special episode of the All About Everest podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, we're new on YouTube, or wherever you listen. You can also follow me on social media at Mama Bear Outdoors or at All About Everest, and join our free community on School where we share Everest updates, discussions, and maybe even start a book club. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, climb your own climb.